My sister stood up at Thanksgiving dinner, raised her wine glass high above the perfectly arranged centerpiece of autumn leaves and candlelight, and announced to our entire family with a voice dripping in false sympathy, "At least I didn't get pregnant at 24 and ruin my life." The crystal glass caught the light as 23 family members turned in slow motion to stare at me and my 2-year-old son Michael, who was innocently playing with his mashed potatoes, making little mountains and valleys on his plate. 8 years later, that same sister would be standing in my doorway, mascara running down her cheeks, begging me for parenting advice while her perfect planned children failed to launch. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. I'm Sarah, now 68 years old, grandmother to 5 beautiful grandchildren who call me Nana and think I hung the moon. My hands are weathered now, marked by decades of hard work, but they're the same hands that held my son through countless sleepless nights, worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, and applauded at every one of his achievements. Back when this story truly begins, I was just a frightened 24-year-old girl trying to make sense of a pregnancy test showing 2 pink lines that would change everything I thought I knew about my future. My parents, God rest their souls, had sacrificed everything to send both Emma and me to college. Dad worked double shifts at the factory while Mom cleaned houses on weekends, all so their daughters could have the education they never did. They'd immigrated here with nothing but hope and determination, building a life penny by penny, dream by dream. When I got that scholarship to State University, I still remember how Mom cried, holding that acceptance letter like it was made of gold. My daughter, the college graduate, she'd whisper to anyone who would listen at church, the grocery store, the bank. Emma, 2 years older and infinitely more organized, had graduated with honors in business administration. She'd landed a corporate job at a Fortune 500 company straight out of college, wore power suits to family dinners, and spoke about 5-year plans and investment portfolios. She was everything our parents had dreamed of: successful, established, proof that their sacrifices had been worth it. Then there was me, the creative writing major who dreamed of being a novelist, working part-time at a bookstore and dating Jake, a musician who promised me the world but disappeared the moment those 2 pink lines appeared. The day I told my parents I was pregnant and dropping out of college, I watched something break in my father's eyes. He didn't yell or throw me out like I'd feared. Instead, he sat down heavily in his worn recliner, the one Mom had reupholstered 3 times because he refused to replace it, and simply asked, "What will you do now, mija?" Mom held me while I cried, whispering prayers in Spanish, rubbing my back the way she had when I was small and scared of thunderstorms. Emma's reaction was worse than my parents' disappointment. She stood in my childhood bedroom, surveying the college textbooks I'd no longer need, and said with ice in her voice, "You're really going to keep it? After everything Mom and Dad did for us? You're just throwing it all away for some guy who's already gone?" When I nodded, she shook her head in disgust. "Don't expect me to pretend this is some blessing in disguise. You're ruining your life, and you're too naive to see it." But despite everything, despite the shame and the fear and the complete derailment of every plan I'd ever made, I never once regretted keeping my son Michael. From the moment I felt him kick, he became my new dream, my revised plan, my unexpected blessing that would prove everyone wrong. Before that infamous Thanksgiving dinner that would shatter our family's carefully maintained facade of harmony, life had settled into a rhythm that, while not perfect, felt like home. Sunday dinners at Mom's house were sacred, non-negotiable events where the aroma of her famous pot roast would drift through the small ranch-style house, calling us all back to our roots. The dining room table, bought secondhand but polished with love until it gleamed, would groan under the weight of too much food and surrounded by mismatched chairs that each held their own family story. Michael and I would arrive early to help with preparations, his small hands eager to fold napkins into crooked triangles, while I peeled potatoes at the kitchen sink where I'd once stood on a step stool to reach the faucet. Mom would tie an apron around Michael's waist, the same faded sunflower print she'd worn when teaching Emma and me to cook, and let him stir the gravy while she guided his movements with patient hands. These were the moments that mattered, the quiet traditions that wove us together despite our differences. Emma would sweep in later with her family, always precisely 15 minutes before dinner was served, David carrying a store-bought pie in a designer box, while their two children, Madison and Connor, remained glued to their iPads until forcibly separated at the table. She'd kiss Mom's cheek, compliment the house's familiar smell, then immediately launch into stories about their recent vacation to Martha's Vineyard or Connor's acceptance into an exclusive summer camp that cost more than I made in 2 months. Our childhood home hadn't changed much over the years. The same family photos lined the hallway, including one of Emma and me in matching Easter dresses, gap-toothed and grinning, before life had divided us into the successful daughter and the cautionary tale. The living room still held Dad's recliner, now occupied by Michael during visits, where he'd curl up with the same books I'd once read, transported by stories of adventure and possibility. My own life with Michael existed in a different universe from Emma's suburban perfection. Our small two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building that had seen better days became our sanctuary. The walls were thin enough to hear Mrs. Chen's Chinese dramas next door, but she'd often knock with leftover dumplings and offers to watch Michael when I had evening shifts. Our furniture was a collection of yard sale finds and hand-me-downs, but each piece had been chosen with care, painted or reupholstered during weekend projects that taught Michael about transformation and seeing potential where others saw garbage. Morning routines in our household started at 5:30 a.m. when I'd slip out of bed to pack lunches and prepare breakfast before my shift at the dental office where I worked as a receptionist. Michael would stumble into the kitchen by 6:15, hair sticking up in impossible directions, ready for our daily ritual of cereal and conversation. We'd talk about his dreams from the night before, what he was learning in school, which library books we'd pick up that evening. These conversations, held over bowls of generic cornflakes, were where I learned my son had a mind that worked differently, beautifully, seeing patterns and connections that escaped most adults. Evenings were for homework at our scratched dining table that doubled as my study space for online classes after Michael went to bed. I'd help him with multiplication tables while dinner simmered on our temperamental stove that required a specific jiggling technique to light the back burner. We'd make games out of everything. Grocery shopping became math practice, laundry sorting taught colors and categories, cooking dinner introduced fractions and following instructions. Weekends meant free adventures, because paid entertainment wasn't in our budget. The public library was our Disneyland, the park our country club, the museum's free admission days our cultural education. Michael learned to find joy in simple things: feeding ducks stale bread, building elaborate worlds from cardboard boxes, conducting science experiments with baking soda and vinegar in our tiny kitchen that would leave us both laughing as foam erupted everywhere. This was our normal, our beautiful, imperfect life that Emma couldn't see past her designer sunglasses. The tension started building slowly, like storm clouds gathering on a summer afternoon when you can feel the electricity in the air, but can't quite pinpoint when the thunder will strike. It was early October, 6 weeks before that catastrophic Thanksgiving, when I first noticed something had shifted in Emma's attitude toward us. The change was subtle at first, hidden beneath her usual veneer of perfectionism and barely concealed superiority, but it was there, pulsing under the surface like a wound that wouldn't heal. It started during what should have been a celebratory phone call. Mom had gathered us on a three-way call to share the news that Michael's teacher had recommended him for the district's gifted program. My heart had swelled with pride as I listened on speakerphone while making dinner. Michael doing homework at the table behind me, unaware of the conversation about his future. She says he's reading at a sixth grade level. Mom gushed, her voice bright with grandmother's pride. And his math scores are off the charts. Sarah, you've done such an amazing job with him. The silence from Emma's end lasted a beat too long before she responded. Well, that's nice, she said, her tone flat as day-old soda. Of course, Madison's private school doesn't really do gifted programs since all the children are already advanced. We don't need to separate them by ability when they're all exceptional. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, must be nice not having to worry about private school applications and interviews. Some of us have to think about our children's entire futures, not just next year. I felt the sting but pushed it aside, focusing on stirring the spaghetti sauce that was our Tuesday night tradition. Michael loved helping me make it, carefully measuring oregano and basil, proud of what he called our secret recipe that was really just whatever herbs were on sale that week. Every child has their own path, Emma, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. We're just proud of Michael for working so hard. Of course you are, Emma replied, and I could practically hear her manicured nails tapping against her marble countertop. Though I suppose when you don't have many options, you celebrate what you can get. Not everyone can afford to give their children every advantage. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle, acrid and impossible to ignore. 2 weeks later, at Mom's birthday dinner, Emma's comments grew bolder. She watched Michael help serve cake, his careful hands steady as he carried plates to each family member, and remarked to our cousin Janet, loud enough for everyone to hear, "He's so helpful. Children really do mature faster when they have to, don't they? Single-parent households force kids to grow up so quickly. Sometimes I wonder if it's fair to them." Michael heard that one. I saw his shoulders tense slightly as he set down Aunt Rita's plate, his bright smile dimming just a fraction. Later, in the car, he asked me what Emma meant. "Am I growing up too fast, Mom?" His voice was small, worried, and I wanted to drive back to Emma's perfect house and shake her until her perfectly styled hair fell out of place. Instead, I told him he was growing up exactly right, at exactly the right speed, and that sometimes adults said things that said more about them than anyone else. The comments continued, each one a small paper cut that individually meant nothing but collectively began to bleed. During a family group text about Halloween plans, Emma shared photos of Madison and Connor's elaborate store-bought costumes that cost hundreds of dollars, then asked what Michael was wearing. When I proudly shared the robot costume we'd made from cardboard boxes and aluminum foil, spending hours painting details and adding LED lights from the dollar store, her response was a single line. How creative. Necessity really is the mother of invention, isn't it? Each interaction left me feeling unsettled, like something was crawling under my skin that I couldn't quite scratch. I became an expert at making excuses for my sister's behavior, constructing elaborate explanations in my mind that painted her cruelty as something else entirely. Late at night, after Michael was asleep, and I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and textbooks, I'd replay her comments and convince myself I was being too sensitive. Emma had always been competitive, I reasoned, even as children. This was nothing new, just the same sister who used to count how many Christmas presents we each received to make sure hers weren't fewer or smaller. When I was 7 and she was 9, Emma had thrown a tantrum because my birthday cake had one more rose than hers had gotten. Mom had to carefully remove the extra frosting flour and eat it herself to restore balance to Emma's universe. Back then, we'd laughed about it, called it Emma being Emma, as if her need to always come out ahead was just a quirky personality trait rather than something deeper. Now, as adults, wasn't this just the grown-up version of counting frosting roses? I told myself she was under pressure at work. David had mentioned during a recent family dinner that Emma was up for a promotion, competing against 3 other candidates for a senior management position. She'd been working 60-hour weeks, leaving the kids with their nanny more often, missing Madison's dance recital because of a critical presentation. The stress had to be eating at her. When people felt their control slipping in one area of life, they often grabbed tighter in others. Maybe putting me down made her feel more secure about her own choices. Or perhaps, I reasoned while folding laundry one evening, this was about her own motherhood journey. Emma had struggled to conceive Madison, going through 2 years of fertility treatments that she'd never fully discussed, but that Mom had hinted at during worried phone calls. She'd planned everything perfectly, waited until the exact right time according to her spreadsheets and life projections, only to discover that nature didn't care about her timeline. Meanwhile, I'd gotten pregnant without trying, without planning, without even wanting it at that moment. Maybe her resentment wasn't really about my unmarried pregnancy, but about the unfairness of fertility itself. I even wondered if she was projecting her own fears onto me. Despite all her advantages, Madison was struggling in school, requiring a reading tutor that Emma tried to keep secret but Mom had accidentally mentioned. Connor, at 6, was having behavioral issues that required weekly therapy sessions they called social skills enrichment. Perhaps seeing Michael thrive despite our circumstances triggered something in Emma, a fear that money and planning couldn't guarantee success, that maybe she'd been sold a lie about what children really needed. During my lunch break at work, I'd sometimes call my friend Lisa, who'd known both Emma and me since high school. She's probably not even aware she's doing it, Lisa suggested one day, trying to be diplomatic. You know how Emma gets tunnel vision. She's so focused on her own path that she doesn't realize her words hurt. It's not malicious, just thoughtless. I wanted to believe that, wanted to think my sister was simply oblivious rather than intentionally cruel. I started preparing myself mentally before family interactions, building up armor made of rationalization and forced understanding. Before Sunday dinners, I'd remind myself that Emma loved us in her own way, that her version of caring meant wanting everyone to meet her standards of success. When she made cutting remarks about Michael's clothes or our apartment or my 10-year-old Honda Civic with the dented bumper, I'd breathe deeply and remember that she'd grown up in the same house with the same immigrant parents who'd worked themselves to the bone. Maybe her obsession with status was just her way of honoring their sacrifices, proving that their hard work had meant something. But deep down, in the place where we store truths we're not ready to face, I knew I was lying to myself. The denial was easier than accepting what was really happening. My sister was deliberately, systematically trying to diminish me, and I was letting her do it because the alternative meant acknowledging that family could be your biggest enemy. The week before Thanksgiving, everything I'd been desperately trying to deny came crashing down with a single phone call that exposed the truth I'd been working so hard to avoid. It was Wednesday evening, and Michael was at his friend Tommy's house working on a science project about the solar system. I was enjoying the rare, quiet grading practice tests for my online accounting course at the kitchen table when Mom called. Her voice had that tentative quality it got when she was about to discuss something uncomfortable, like when she'd had to tell me Dad needed heart surgery or when Grandma had passed. "Honey, I need to talk to you about something," she began, and I could hear her settling into her kitchen chair, the one that creaked slightly when you leaned back. "I had lunch with Aunt Rita and Janet today, and they mentioned something concerning." She paused, and I could picture her adjusting her reading glasses the way she did when she was nervous. "They said Emma's been calling them, talking about your situation. She told them you've been struggling financially, that Michael's wearing Shoes with holes in them, that you've been skipping meals to pay bills. The words hit me like ice water. I looked down at the chicken and rice I'd prepared for dinner, the budget meal that was perfectly nutritious and that Michael loved. Mom, that's not true. We're fine. Money's tight, but we're managing. Michael's shoes are practically new. I bought them at the start of the school year. My voice was steady, but my hands had started shaking slightly, making it hard to hold the phone. I know, sweetheart. I told them that. Mom continued. But there was more coming. I could feel it in her hesitation. But Emma also told them you'd been borrowing money from her, that she's been secretly helping you with groceries and Michael's school supplies. Rita wanted to organize a family collection to help you out for Christmas. She was going to announce it at Thanksgiving. Have everyone contribute to a fund for you and Michael. The room seemed to spin slightly. Emma had never given us a penny. In fact, just last month when Michael needed a graphing calculator for his advanced math class, I'd saved for 3 weeks to buy it rather than ask anyone for help. The thought of Emma painting herself as our secret benefactor while we scraped by on our own made bile rise in my throat. Mom, I have never asked Emma for money. Not once. Not even when things were really bad right after Michael was born. I believe you, Mom said quietly, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice, though I wasn't sure if it was directed at me or Emma. But there's more, Sarah. She's been suggesting to various family members that maybe you need more help than just money, that maybe someone else should have oversight of your finances, make sure Michael's needs are being met properly. She mentioned that there are programs for single mothers who are struggling, implied that you're too proud to admit you need help. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to do something with the angry energy suddenly coursing through my body. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or thoughtless comments anymore. This was calculated, deliberate character assassination. Emma was building a case against me, painting me as an incompetent mother who couldn't provide for her child, and herself as the concerned sister trying to help from the shadows. She even mentioned to Cousin Robert that maybe Michael would benefit from spending more time in a stable environment, Mom added, her voice barely above a whisper now. She offered to have him stay with her during the week so he could attend the better schools in her district. Robert was a family law attorney, and the implication of Emma discussing my child's living situation with him wasn't lost on either of us. The evidence was clear now, impossible to rationalize away. My sister wasn't just competing with me or projecting her insecurities. She was actively working to undermine my credibility as a mother. Thanksgiving arrived with the kind of crisp November weather that usually made me nostalgic for childhood holidays. But this year, I walked into Mom's house carrying a pie I'd baked at 2 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, my stomach churning with dread. Michael ran ahead, excited to see his grandparents, oblivious to the tension I could feel crackling in the air like static electricity. Emma's Lexus was already in the driveway, parked at that perfect angle she always managed, and through the window, I could see the family gathered around the dining room table I'd helped Mom set the night before. The dinner started normally enough, with Dad's traditional prayer that always ran too long, but that we all loved anyway. His weathered hands clasped as he thanked God for health, family, and blessings we didn't deserve, but received anyway. The turkey was golden and perfect. Mom's sweet potato casserole drew compliments from everyone, and Michael charmed the table with his enthusiastic explanation of why he was thankful for everything from his grandmother's cooking to the library's new science section. Emma had been drinking since we arrived, her wine glass never quite empty, David periodically refilling it with the expensive Cabernet they'd brought. By the time we'd cleared the dinner plates and Mom was bringing out dessert, Emma's cheeks were flushed, and her laugh had taken on that sharp edge I recognized from college when she'd had too much at parties. She kept staring at Michael and me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between pity and disgust. Then it happened. Dad had just started serving Mom's famous pecan pie when Emma suddenly stood up, swaying slightly, raising her wine glass high. The conversation died immediately, everyone turning to look at her. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, her words just slightly slurred but still razor-sharp with intention. "To family, to the choices we make, to the lives we build with careful planning and consideration." She paused, looking directly at me, and I knew with horrible certainty what was coming. To those of us who waited until we were married, financially stable, and emotionally mature before bringing children into this world, to those of us who didn't throw away our parents' sacrifices on a moment of carelessness. Her voice grew louder, more pointed. At least I didn't get pregnant at 24 and ruin my life like some people at this table. The silence that followed was deafening. Forks frozen halfway to mouths, Aunt Rita's hand covered her mouth in shock, and Mom's face had gone pale. But the worst part, the part that will haunt me forever, was Michael's small voice cutting through the silence. "Mommy, what's ruined?" His innocent face looked up at me, mashed potatoes still on his cheek, his eyes confused and suddenly worried. Did I ruin something? The room erupted. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making dishes jump. "Emma Marie, you apologize. Right now!" Mom was crying, reaching for Michael. David was trying to pull Emma back down to her seat, muttering her name urgently. But Emma wasn't done. The dam had broken, and years of resentment came flooding out. "Why should I apologize for telling the truth?" she shouted, shaking off David's hand. Everyone tiptoes around it, pretending Sarah's some kind of hero for raising a child alone when really she was just irresponsible. Mom and Dad worked themselves to death to give us opportunities, and she threw it all away for some musician who didn't even stick around long enough to meet his own son. And now we all have to pretend that her mistake was some kind of blessing? Michael's face crumbled. He understood enough. Too much. I saw the moment the words registered. Saw him process that his aunt, his family, saw him as a mistake. I pulled him against me, covering his ears, but the damage was done. Through my own tears, I managed to speak, my voice deadly quiet. "The only mistake in this room is thinking that love and planning are the same thing. My son is not a mistake. He's the best thing that ever happened to me, and if you can't see that, then you're the one who's ruined. Ruined by your own bitter, empty heart." I stood, lifting Michael into my arms even though he was getting too big for it, and walked out, leaving behind the chaos of shouting voices and shattered family peace. I was still sitting in my car outside Mom's house, Michael crying quietly in the back seat, when my phone rang. It was Mom, her voice thick with tears and barely controlled anger. "Come back inside, just you," she said. "Michael can stay with Dad in the garage. He's setting up the old train set to distract him. Emma and David left, and there's something you need to know." Against my better judgment, I carried my son to my father, who took him with gentle hands and a look that promised protection, then walked back into the house that suddenly felt like a crime scene. Mom, Aunt Rita, and Cousin Janet were sitting around the kitchen table, the Thanksgiving dishes abandoned and congealing on the counter. Janet, who worked as a paralegal and had always been the family's unofficial keeper of secrets, had her laptop open. "Sarah, sit down," she said gently but firmly. "After what just happened, we think you need to know what's been going on behind your back." Mom pushed a cup of coffee toward me with shaking hands. "I should have told you sooner, but I kept hoping I was misunderstanding. 3 months ago, Emma came to your father and me with a proposition. She said she was worried about Michael's future, that you were struggling more than you let on. She offered to set up an education trust for Michael, but there were conditions." Mom's voice broke slightly. "She wanted us to make her the trustee of any inheritance you would receive from us." The room seemed to tilt. "She said it would protect Michael," Mom continued, tears streaming down her face now. "That if something happened to you, or if you made poor financial decisions, Michael would still be taken care of." She had papers drawn up by a lawyer, professional documents that made it sound so reasonable. She said you'd never have to know, that it would just be insurance for Michael's future. Janet turned her laptop toward me, showing a string of emails from Emma to various family members. She's been building a case for months, Janet explained, her legal training evident in her organized presentation. Look at this email to Uncle Robert from 6 weeks ago. She's asking about custody laws in the state, specifically about third-party custody when a parent is deemed financially unfit. She frames it as concern, but she's gathering information about how an aunt could gain custody of a nephew. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through email after email. Emma had created a whole narrative. I was depressed, possibly developing the same instability that had affected our maternal grandmother who'd struggled with mental health. She'd documented every time I'd looked tired at family gatherings, every time Michael wore the same outfit twice, every time we'd eaten the free lunch at church community events. She'd taken photos, actual photos, of my car with its dented bumper, of Michael playing in patched jeans, of our apartment building from the outside, making it look as run down as possible. There's more, Aunt Rita said quietly. She'd been Emma's confidant, or so Emma had thought. She told me she's been in contact with Madison's private school admissions director. She wanted to know if they had emergency scholarship programs for family members in crisis situations. She was planning to petition for temporary guardianship of Michael, citing educational neglect because he's in public school despite being gifted. The conspiracy was breathtaking in its scope. This wasn't just about inheritance money or sibling rivalry. Emma was systematically trying to prove I was an unfit mother, possibly to gain control of Michael himself. But why? I whispered, though part of me already knew. Because Michael is everything her children aren't, Janet said bluntly. He's brilliant, kind, self-motivated. Madison is struggling academically despite tutoring, and Connor's behavioral issues are getting worse. She can't stand that you, the family failure, produced a child who outshines hers in every way. If she can't beat you through her own children's success, she'll take yours. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My sister wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. That night, after I'd somehow managed to drive us home, given Michael a bath, and tucked him into bed with promises that everything would be okay, I finally let myself fall apart. I sat on the cold bathroom floor, back against the door, and sobbed with a force that felt like it might break my ribs. The tears came in waves, each one carrying a different memory, a different moment of sacrifice that now felt like it had been spit on by my own sister. I remembered the night Michael was born, how I'd been alone in the delivery room except for one kind nurse who held my hand when the pain got too bad. Emma had been in Paris for a business trip she couldn't possibly reschedule, though she'd managed to send flowers with a card that read, "Congratulations on your new responsibility." Even then, she couldn't just say, "Congratulations on your baby." I'd held my newborn son, counted his perfect fingers and toes, and promised him that I'd be enough, that we'd be enough, just the two of us against the world. The memories crashed over me relentlessly. That first winter when the heat got shut off because I had to choose between the gas bill and formula. I'd moved Michael's crib into the kitchen, turned on the oven, and slept on the floor next to him, waking up every hour to make sure he was warm enough. My back ached for weeks from that hard linoleum floor, but Michael never knew we were cold. He slept peacefully while I shivered, singing him lullabies through chattering teeth. I thought about the birthday parties I couldn't afford to throw, watching other mothers at the park talk about bounce houses and party favors while I calculated whether we could splurge on a box cake mix. Michael's 4th birthday, when all I could manage was a handmade crown from cardboard and a cake from the day-old section of the bakery, he'd hugged me and said it was the best birthday ever because we got to spend the whole day together. He didn't know I'd taken an unpaid day off work that would mean rice and beans for 2 weeks. The scholarship applications I'd filled out with cramped fingers at 3 a.m., the secondhand clothes I'd learned to mend and alter so they'd look new, the free samples I'd collected from the mall to make Christmas stockings seem full. Every no I'd had to say to field trips I couldn't afford. Every time I'd pretended I wasn't hungry so Michael could have seconds. Every night I'd fallen asleep over textbooks trying to finish my degree online so I could give him a better life. And through it all, Emma had been there in the background, watching, judging, apparently documenting our struggles like evidence in a court case against my motherhood. While I was teaching Michael to tie his shoes with patience and love, she was taking pictures of his worn sneakers. While I was helping him with homework at our wobbly kitchen table, she was calculating how to steal him away from me. The sobs turned to hyperventilation. I pressed a towel against my mouth to muffle the sound, not wanting to wake Michael, not wanting him to see his mother shattered on the bathroom floor. But the pain was too big for my body to contain. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the exhaustion of years of trying so hard, only to be told it wasn't enough, would never be enough. The unfairness of it all sat on my chest like a weight, making it hard to breathe. I thought about my parents, how Mom's face had looked when Emma made her toast, the way Dad's shoulders had sagged with shame at what one daughter had said to another. They'd worked so hard to give us both a better life, and now their family was fractured, possibly beyond repair. The guilt of that, of being the catalyst even though I wasn't at fault, added another layer to my grief. But beneath all the pain, something else was stirring. A tiny ember of rage, hot and pure, beginning to glow in the darkness of my despair. The next morning arrived too soon, sunlight streaming through the bathroom window where I'd eventually fallen asleep against the door. My body ached. My eyes were swollen from crying, but something had crystallized in me during those dark hours on the cold tile floor. I stood up slowly, looked at myself in the mirror, really looked. The woman staring back wasn't the victim Emma had painted her to be. She was a survivor, a fighter who'd built something from nothing, and it was time she remembered that. Michael was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal he'd poured himself, reading one of his library books about space exploration. He looked up when I entered, and I saw the worry in his 8-year-old eyes trying to be brave. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked quietly. "Is Aunt Emma right? Am I a mistake?" That question, that horrible doubt in my brilliant, beautiful son's voice, was the match that lit the ember into a flame. I sat down across from him, took his small hands in mine, and spoke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. "Michael, look at me. You are not a mistake. You are a miracle. You're the boy who taught himself to read at 4 because you wanted to know what the dinosaur books said. You're the kid who spent his birthday money buying sandwiches for the homeless man outside our building. You're the person who makes me want to be better every single day." His eyes filled with tears, but also with relief. Then why did Aunt Emma say those things? I made a decision then to be honest with him, age appropriately, but truthfully. Sometimes, sweetheart, people who are unhappy with themselves try to make others feel small so they can feel big. Aunt Emma has everything money can buy, but she doesn't have what we have. We have each other. We have love that doesn't depend on conditions or expectations, and we have the knowledge that everything we've achieved, we earned ourselves. That scares her. Michael considered this, his analytical mind working through the logic. So she's jealous? In a way, yes. But that's her problem to solve, not ours. Our job is to keep being who we are, keep working hard, and keep proving that success isn't just about money or perfect plans. It's about resilience, determination, and love. I pulled him into a hug, and as I held my son, I felt something shift inside me. For 8 years, I'd been apologizing for our existence, trying to make ourselves smaller to avoid judgment, accepting scraps of respect from people who should have loved us unconditionally. That ended today. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the college brochures websites I'd bookmarked but never seriously pursued. MIT, Caltech, Stanford. Schools that seemed impossible for a kid from our circumstances. Then I looked at Michael. How would you like to really dream big? I asked him. What if we stopped apologizing for who we are and started showing everyone what we're capable of? His face lit up with excitement. You mean like the science fair? But bigger? Much bigger, I confirmed. We're going to work harder than we've ever worked. Not to prove Aunt Emma wrong. That's too small a goal. We're going to do it because you deserve every opportunity in the world, and I'm going to make sure you get them. We're going to turn every disadvantage into a strength, every obstacle into a stepping stone. I spent that day creating a plan, not a revenge plan. Revenge was too petty for what I had in mind. This was a success plan, a complete transformation of our trajectory. I researched every free program, every scholarship opportunity, every STEM camp and science competition. I made lists of libraries with better resources, free tutoring programs, online courses Michael could take to get ahead. Standing in our small kitchen, surrounded by secondhand furniture and hand-me-down dreams, I made a promise to my son and myself. We would not just survive Emma's cruelty, we would transcend it entirely. My revenge wasn't going to involve lawyers or public confrontations or even acknowledging Emma's existence. No, my revenge would be something far more powerful, undeniable, overwhelming success that couldn't be attributed to luck or connections or anything other than raw talent and determination. I called it Operation Excellence, and I mapped it out like a military campaign on a poster board that took up our entire living room wall. The first phase involved identifying every free resource within a 50-mile radius. I spent nights researching, discovering that our city library offered free SAT prep courses, that the community college had a program where professors mentored gifted middle school students, that the science museum needed young volunteers, which would give Michael access to their labs and equipment. I created a color-coded schedule that maximized every opportunity while still giving Michael time to be a kid. I reached out to Mrs. Chen next door, who turned out to be a retired chemistry professor from Beijing. When I explained our situation, leaving out the family drama but emphasizing Michael's potential, she offered to tutor him in advanced mathematics and science for free. Brilliant minds must be nurtured, she said simply, and began coming over 3 evenings a week with textbooks she'd kept from her teaching days. The second phase was documentation. If Emma wanted to build a case, I'd build a counter case that would make hers look like the bitter fantasy it was. I started a blog called Rising Strong, A Single Mom's Journey, where I documented Michael's achievements, our learning adventures, and the creative ways we tackled education on a budget. But I was strategic. I never mentioned family, never showed negativity, just pure, relentless positivity and progress. The blog started gaining followers, other single parents facing similar challenges, creating a community that Emma could never claim we lacked. I contacted the local newspaper about doing a feature on exceptional students from underprivileged backgrounds. When they interviewed Michael about his science fair project, a water filtration system made from recyclable materials that actually worked, he spoke eloquently about how his mom taught him that innovation comes from necessity, that some of the world's best inventors started with nothing but problems to solve. The article ran with a photo of us in our small apartment, surrounded by his handmade projects, both of us beaming with genuine pride. Phase 3 was the long game, competitions and applications. I learned that science fairs, math olympiads, and robotics competitions didn't just offer trophies, they offered scholarships and connections. We started small, with the district science fair where Michael's project on sustainable energy solutions won first place. Then regional competitions, where he began to be noticed by judges who were professors and industry professionals. Each win was meticulously documented, each certificate framed and hung on our wall of triumph. I also quietly reached out to successful people I'd met through work, explaining that I was seeking mentorship opportunities for my gifted son. Dr. Patterson, whose dental practice I'd managed reception for, turned out to have a brother on the MIT admissions board. She didn't promise anything, but she made sure Michael's name would be known when the time came. The janitor at Michael's school had a daughter who'd gotten into Harvard despite coming from poverty. He connected us with the nonprofit that had helped her navigate the application process. But the masterpiece of my plan was something Emma would never see coming. I enrolled in an executive MBA program online, studying after Michael went to bed, completing assignments on my lunch breaks. If Emma wanted to question my financial competency, I'd become more qualified than she'd ever be. I was already learning about trust law, investment strategies, and estate planning, knowledge that would be crucial if Emma ever tried to challenge my parenting legally. Every move was calculated not for revenge, but for results. Each success would stand on its own merit, unimpeachable and earned. Emma could whisper all she wanted about our struggles, but achievements speak louder than gossip, and we were about to become impossible to ignore. 8 years passed like scenes in a montage, each one building toward something even I couldn't have fully envisioned that night on the bathroom floor. Michael grew from a wounded 8-year-old into a confident 16-year-old who stood 6 feet tall but still had the same gentle eyes and brilliant mind. Our small apartment became command central for his various projects, robots he'd built from salvaged parts, whiteboards covered in equations I was finally starting to understand, thanks to my MBA studies, and shelves lined with trophies and certificates that told the story of a boy who refused to be limited by circumstances. The family dynamics had shifted dramatically over those years. Emma and I maintained a cold distance at family gatherings, sitting at opposite ends of tables, speaking only when absolutely necessary. But everyone had watched Michael's rise with growing amazement. His name appeared in local papers, then state newsletters, then national science journals for young innovators. He'd won the Intel Science Fair, been invited to present at MIT's campus during a summer program, and had professors from multiple universities following his work. Meanwhile, whispers about Emma's children grew harder to ignore. Madison, despite years of expensive tutoring and test prep, couldn't break 1100 on her SATs. She'd applied to 15 colleges, each application crafted by hired consultants, each essay polished by professional editors. Connor had been expelled from 2 private schools for behavioral issues that money couldn't fix, finally landing in a therapeutic boarding school that cost more than most people's yearly salary. It was February, and college acceptance letters were beginning to arrive. The family group chat that Emma had once dominated with Madison's achievements had gone suspiciously quiet. Mom called me privately to share that Madison had been rejected from her early decision school, then her early action schools, and the regular decision letters weren't looking promising. Emma's beside herself, Mom whispered. She keeps asking what went wrong, how this could happen when they did everything right. Michael, on the other hand, was eerily calm as colleges began responding. He'd applied to 12 schools, but there was only one he truly wanted, MIT. We'd visited during his junior year, walking through campus where he'd touched buildings like they were sacred spaces, watching students who looked like older versions of himself discussing problems that made his eyes light up. "This is where I belong, Mom," he'd said simply, and I'd believed him. The thin envelopes came first. Acceptances from state schools with good merit scholarships, honors programs at respected universities, opportunities that would have made me weep with joy just years ago, but now felt like consolation prizes. Michael thanked each one gracefully, filing them away as backup plans, Emma must have heard through the family grapevine because she suddenly broke her years of silence to text me. Heard Michael's applying to colleges. Hope he's being realistic about his options. These elite schools are impossibly competitive, even for privileged kids. Then came the morning of March 14th, known as MIT Day, because the decisions were released at 3:14 p.m., a play on pi that made Michael laugh with nervous energy. The entire day felt electric. I'd taken off work, unable to focus on anything except the clock. Michael's science teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had let him leave class early, understanding the magnitude of the moment. Mrs. Chen came over with homemade dumplings for luck. Even our landlord, Mr. Peterson, who'd watched Michael grow up, stopped by to wish him well. We sat at our kitchen table, the same one where we'd done 8 years of homework, where Michael had built his first robot, where I'd studied for my MBA by lamplight. His laptop was open, the MIT portal loaded, waiting for 3:14. Michael's hands were steady, but I could see the pulse in his neck, quick and intense. 8 years of work, sacrifice, and dreams came down to this moment. The family group chat had been silent all day, but I knew they were all waiting, watching, especially Emma. At exactly 3:14, Michael clicked the button. The screen loaded slowly, each second stretching like an eternity. Then, confetti exploded across the screen, digital but somehow more beautiful than anything real. "Congratulations!" blazed across in MIT's distinctive font. "You're officially admitted to MIT." Michael stared for a moment, then let out a whoop that probably reached 3 floors up. I was crying. Mrs. Chen was crying. Michael was somehow laughing and crying simultaneously. But that wasn't even the best part. As he scrolled down, the letter continued. "Furthermore, we're pleased to offer you a full scholarship through the Presidential Scholars Program, reserved for students who demonstrate exceptional academic achievement and potential for leadership in science and technology." Michael's invention, a water purification system that could be built for under $50 and maintained with basic supplies, had caught the attention of MIT's sustainability initiative. They wanted him not just as a student, but as someone who could contribute to their research from day one. The boy who'd been called a ruined life was now being courted by one of the world's most prestigious institutions. I posted the news on my blog, on Facebook, in the family group chat with a simple message. "Proud to announce that Michael has been accepted to MIT with a full presidential scholarship. Thank you to everyone who believed in him." The responses poured in immediately. Hundreds of congratulations, heart emojis, celebration gifts from cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends. But from Emma, silence. Then, 3 days later, the real twist came. Madison's last rejection letter arrived the same day the local newspaper called to do a feature on Michael's MIT acceptance. The timing was coincidental, but crushing for Emma. That evening, she appeared at our door, the first time she'd come to our apartment in 8 years. She looked different, older, defeated. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her designer clothes replaced with wrinkled casual wear I'd never seen her in. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. Michael was at a celebration dinner with his science team, so it was just us. I let her in, watching as she took in our small space that had produced what her mansion couldn't. She sat on our secondhand couch, looking at the wall of Michael's achievements, and began to cry. Not delicate tears, but ugly, body-shaking sobs. "How did you do it?" she finally gasped out. "I gave my kids everything. The best schools, tutors, coaches, consultants. Madison had every advantage, every opportunity. We spent $300,000 on education alone. And she didn't get in anywhere except the state safety school. Connor's therapist says he'll be lucky to graduate high school." She looked up at me, mascara streaming down her face. "Your son came from nothing. A broken home, no father, no money. You were supposed to be the cautionary tale, the example of what not to do. But Michael, he's extraordinary. And my kids, my perfectly planned kids, they're so ordinary, they're below average. How? Please, Sarah, I need to know. What parenting tips can you give me? What's your secret? The woman who'd humiliated me at Thanksgiving, who'd tried to steal my son, who'd attempted to destroy my reputation, was now begging for my advice. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I could have been cruel. I could have thrown every insult back in her face, reminded her of every cutting remark, every attempt to undermine me. I had 8 years of ammunition stored up. Instead, I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time in years, and saw not my enemy, but a broken woman who'd believed that money could buy success, that planning could eliminate struggle. That privilege was the same as power. I sat down beside her, handed her a tissue, and said the truest thing I knew. Try ruining your life first. When you have nothing left to lose, when everyone counts you out, when your back is against the wall, that's when you learn what really matters. That's when you stop performing success and start building it. Emma stared at me for a long moment, processing my words, then asked quietly, "What do you mean?" So I told her the truth she'd never wanted to hear. You gave your kids everything except the need to fight for anything. They never learned resilience because you removed every obstacle. They never developed grit because you smoothed every path. When Madison struggled with reading, you hired someone to read for her instead of sitting with her. Night after night, like I did with Michael, sounding out words until we both wanted to cry. When Connor acted out, you found schools that would tolerate him instead of teaching him to regulate himself. I walked to the wall of achievements and pointed to Michael's first science fair certificate, just an honorable mention from 4th grade. This was 3 months of collecting cans to buy supplies, testing and retesting in our kitchen sink, failing 12 times before something finally worked. He earned this $20 certificate with more sweat than Madison put into her entire college application process. Emma's transformation didn't happen overnight, but something shifted that day. She started coming around more, watching how Michael and I interacted, observing our rhythms and routines. She was stunned to discover Michael did his own laundry, cooked dinner twice a week, managed his own schedule, and had been contributing to our household income through tutoring younger students since he was 14. I never let my kids do anything that might inconvenience them, she admitted one evening while helping us prepare dinner, something she'd never done in her own home where they had a housekeeper. I thought I was protecting them, but I was crippling them. The real sign of change came 6 months later. Michael had started at MIT and was thriving, calling home with excitement about professors who knew his work, classmates who challenged him, research opportunities that made his dreams feel achievable. During fall break, he came home to find Emma and Connor in our apartment. Connor, now 17 and recently returned from therapeutic boarding school, was at our kitchen table with Michael's old robotics kit spread out before him. "Michael's teaching me to build," Connor said shyly, the first genuine enthusiasm I'd heard from him in years. "He says I can't buy my way out of problems anymore. I have to build my way out." Michael spent that entire break mentoring his cousin, not with expensive equipment but with salvaged parts from electronics stores, teaching him the patience and problem-solving Emma's money had never bought. By the end of the week, Connor had built his first functioning robot. Crude, held together with duct tape, but his. The pride on his face was something money couldn't purchase. Emma also hired Michael's science teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, not as a tutor, but as an advisor to help her understand how to step back and let her children struggle productively. She downsized their house, not for financial reasons but to teach her kids that space had to be earned and maintained, not just provided. Madison took a gap year, working at a nonprofit that Michael had volunteered with, learning what it meant to serve rather than be served. At Michael's MIT graduation 4 years later, where he delivered the student address as class valedictorian with 3 job offers from tech giants and a full scholarship to pursue his PhD, Emma stood next to me crying genuine tears of pride. Madison was there too, having finally found her passion in social work after years of real world experience, accepted to a modest but respectable college where she was thriving. Connor had just been accepted to trade school for robotics engineering, following the path Michael had shown him. In his speech, Michael thanked many people, but when he looked at me and said, "To my mother, who taught me that circumstances don't define potential, that poverty isn't a limitation but a motivation, and that the best things in life come from the struggles we overcome, not the struggles we avoid." The entire auditorium erupted in applause. Emma grabbed my hand and squeezed it, whispering, "Thank you for ruining your life. It saved all of ours." Today, 15 years after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, I sit in my study. Yes, I have a study now, in the modest but beautiful home Michael insisted on buying for me after his company went public. The walls are still covered with his achievements, but now they're joined by Madison's social work degree, Connor's robotics competition medals, and photos from Emma's recent wedding to her second husband, a humble contractor who teaches their blended family the value of working with their hands. Michael, now 32, runs a foundation that provides STEM education resources to single-parent households. His water purification system has been implemented in 12 developing countries, saving thousands of lives. He married a brilliant doctor who also came from humble beginnings, and they're raising their daughter with a perfect balance of opportunity and struggle, privilege and purpose. When people ask him about his success, he tells them about the apartment with thin walls, the mother who worked 3 jobs, and the aunt who taught him that family wounds can become family wisdom. Emma and I have breakfast together every Sunday now. She often brings articles about successful people who came from nothing, studying them like scriptures, trying to understand what she missed the first time around. "I spent so much time trying to prevent failure," she told me recently, "that I prevented growth." Madison, now a successful social worker specializing in family dynamics, jokes that our family could be her entire case study. Connor owns his own robotics repair shop and mentors kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, teaching them what Michael taught him, that creation beats consumption every time. The irony isn't lost on any of us. The sister who announced at Thanksgiving that I'd ruined my life by getting pregnant at 24 ended up being right, just not in the way she meant. I did ruin my life. My perfectly planned, safely mapped, carefully structured life. I ruined it completely, and from those ruins, I built something extraordinary. Not just Michael's success, but my own MBA, my consulting firm that helps single parents navigate education systems, my book about turning disadvantage into fuel that Emma insisted on writing the foreword for. That Thanksgiving comment that was meant to shame me became our family's turning point. It forced us all to confront what we really valued: the appearance of success or actual achievement, the absence of struggle or the strength that comes from overcoming it, the privilege of wealth or the power of purpose. Emma thought she was protecting her children by giving them everything. I couldn't give Michael everything, so I gave him the only thing I had: the knowledge that he could earn anything. Here's what I learned, what I want every parent reading this to understand. Your children don't need perfect circumstances. They need to see you fight for them. They don't need every opportunity handed to them. They need to learn to create opportunities. They don't need to be protected from failure. They need to learn that failure is just data, information about what to try next. The parents killing themselves to give their kids everything might actually be giving them nothing of real value. When Emma said I'd ruined my life, she meant I'd deviated from the script, failed to follow the rules, broken the traditional timeline of success. But sometimes the best thing you can do is burn the script entirely. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can teach your children is that life doesn't end when Plan A falls apart. It begins when you realize you're capable of creating Plan B through Z and beyond. So here's my question for you. What ruined life moment are you hiding from, ashamed of, or letting others use against you? What if that moment isn't your weakness but your superpower waiting to be activated? What if the very thing people judge you for could become the foundation of something extraordinary? Share your story in the comments below. Tell me about a time when your biggest failure became your greatest teacher. And if you're a single parent feeling judged, overwhelmed, or doubting yourself, remember this: you're not ruining anything. You're building something. The only question is whether you're brave enough to see it through. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong, it's proving yourself right.